Some men run from the law. Some men run from their debts. Cole ran from a memory, a ghost with his daughter's eyes, and he'd run all the way to the end of the world to do it. Have you ever known a quiet that was so loud it deafened you? That was his life. A cabin carved into the side of a mountain that didn't care for company, a landscape of jagged peaks and unforgiving wind that scoured a man down to his bones. He wanted the scouring. He wanted the silence that screamed. Then one night, the storm came, and it brought her. It wasn't a normal storm, the kind that just washes the dust from the pines. This one was a biblical rage, a tantrum of thunder and lightning that clawed at the roof and threw rain like handfuls of gravel against the windows. He was by the fire, nursing a whiskey, watching the flames eat the wood, each crackle a tick of a clock counting down to nothing. That's when he heard it. A sound that didn't belong. Not the howl of the wind or the groan of the trees. It was a splintering, a desperate crack of wood from the direction of his porch. He moved with a practiced economy, no wasted motion. The old rifle came off the wall mount, heavy and familiar in his hands, a cold piece of his past. He opened the door a crack, the wind trying to tear it from his grip, and saw her. A shape. A heap of wet rags and tangled hair collapsed against his woodpile, barely human. He didn't think. He acted. The way a man does when he's seen too much to be surprised by anything, even a wraith delivered by a tempest. He scooped her up, she weighed nothing, a bird with broken wings. Inside, the firelight danced over a face pale as river stone, lips blue, a latticework of old and new bruises stark against her skin. Her clothes were torn and soaked through, a second skin of ice. She was shivering so violently her teeth rattled a frantic, desperate rhythm. He laid her on the bearskin rug before the hearth, her body a frozen knot. He knew that cold. He'd seen it before, in the mountains, in the war, in the eyes of a state trooper on a night he could never forget. It was a thief, that kind of cold. It stole the life right out of you while you slept. He knelt beside her. Her breathing was a shallow, ragged whisper. He knew what he had to do. He looked at her, then at the fire, then at his own trembling hands. It wasn't a choice. It was a necessity. His voice, when it came, was rough from disuse, a gravelly tear in the fabric of the storm's roar. "You'll take off your clothes now," said the rugged rancher to the woman. Then he started shaking. It wasn't from the cold seeping in from the open door. It was the ghost, the memory of another small, cold body he had failed to warm, rising up from the floorboards of his soul. He turned away, his back to her, grabbing the thickest wool blanket he owned. "The wet will kill you." He laid the blanket on the floor beside her, his movement stiff, formal. He didn't watch. He listened. The faint, clumsy rustle of frozen fabric, the chattering of teeth, a weak, defeated sob. When he heard the soft weight of her body settling into the wool, he turned back. She was cocooned, a miserable chrysalis, nothing visible but a dark tangle of wet hair. He took her sodden clothes with a pair of fireplace tongs and dropped them into a bucket, the gesture as sterile as a surgeon's. He didn't want to touch them, didn't want to know the story they told of mud and thorns and running. He just wanted the silence back. But the silence, he was beginning to understand, was gone for good. He worked through the night, a silent sentinel. He fed the fire, log by steady log, making it a roaring guardian against the cold that clung to her. He boiled water, making a weak broth from a dried-out hunk of jerky and some wild onions, the smell filling the small cabin with a scent of something other than dust and regret. She didn't stir. He watched the rise and fall of the blanket, a fragile tide, and wondered what kind of trouble had washed up on his shore. Mornings for Cole had a ritual, a silent liturgy that kept the ghosts at bay. The grind of coffee beans, the slice of bacon in a hot cast-iron skillet, the walk to the barn where his old horse, a grey gelding named Boulder, would greet him with a low nicker. But this morning was different. The rhythm was broken. There was a presence in his cabin, a small, breathing knot of chaos curled by his fire. He left a bowl of oatmeal and a tin cup of water on a crate near the hearth and went about his chores, the air charged with an unspoken question. He split wood with a furious, mechanical precision, each swing of the axe a blow against the thoughts crowding his mind. Who was she? What was she running from? And the most dangerous question of all, what was he going to do with her? When he returned, the bowl was empty. She was still in the blanket, but she had shifted, turned to face the fire, as if drawn to its life force. He saw a hand, thin and bruised, emerge from the wool to pull the blanket tighter. That was it. No words. No acknowledgement. But it was something. It was a start. Days bled into one another, marked not by the calendar but by these small, imperceptible shifts. He would leave food, and it would be gone. He would come in from the cold and see that a log had been added to the fire in his absence. She remained a fixture on the hearth, a silent, watchful statue. He never pushed, never asked a name. He knew trauma. He knew it had its own timetable, its own brutal logic. You couldn't force a locked door, you had to wait for the person inside to feel safe enough to turn the key. He started talking to her, in a way. Not asking questions, but narrating his day in clipped, factual sentences as he cleaned his tack or sharpened a knife. Fences down on the north pasture. Bear, I think Boulder threw a shoe. Have to ride into town soon. He wasn't sure if she was listening, but the sound of a human voice, even his own rusty one, seemed to sand down the sharp edges of the silence between them. He was talking to her, but he was also talking to himself, reminding himself that there was still a world outside his self-imposed prison, a world of fences and horseshoes and life that went on. One afternoon, he came inside to find her standing. She was wearing one of his old flannel shirts, the fabric hanging off her small frame like a scarecrow's coat. She was staring at a small, framed photograph on his mantelpiece. A woman with a kind smile and a little girl with bright, laughing eyes. His wife. His daughter. The ghosts he ran from. She looked at him, her eyes wide, ancient with a fear he recognized. It was the first time she had truly met his gaze. He said nothing. He simply nodded, a gesture of immense weight, and went to the stove to make coffee. The question hung in the air between them, but he would not be the one to answer it. Not yet. Her healing was like watching a wildflower push its way through concrete. It was a slow, stubborn, almost impossible thing. It was the third week when the first word came. He'd come in from the barn, stamping snow from his boots, and found her holding the empty coffee pot, looking at it with a kind of helpless confusion. He moved to take it from her. His fingers brushed hers. She flinched, a sharp, violent recoil, and the pot clattered to the floor. Sorry, she whispered. The word was a cracked, fragile thing, barely audible. But it was there. A sound. A connection. Cole froze, his hand still outstretched. He looked at her, at the terror in her eyes, not of him, but of the contact. He slowly lowered his hand. It's all right, he said, his own voice sounding foreign. He picked up the pot. No harm done. He made a fresh pot of coffee, his movements deliberate, careful. He set a full mug on the table for her and sat down opposite, leaving a vast, safe distance between them. She watched him, then hesitantly reached for the mug, her hands wrapping around its warmth as if it were an anchor. Her name was Lena. She told him that a few days later, her voice still a shy whisper. She offered it up like a fragile gift, a piece of herself she was reclaiming. She didn't offer anything else. No story of where she came from or what she had endured. He didn't ask. He just nodded. Cole, he said in return. And with that, they had an identity beyond a man and a woman, beyond a rescuer and a victim. They were Cole and Lena. A strange, silent household on the edge of the world. She started to help. Small things at first. She would wash the dishes while he was outside. She folded his laundry, her movements neat and precise. She started tending to the small pot of herbs he kept on the windowsill, her fingers gentle on the green leaves. A quiet domesticity settled over the cabin, a rhythm of shared tasks and comfortable silences. He taught her how to load the rifle. He didn't explain why. He just took her out back one crisp, clear morning, the snow crunching under their boots. He showed her how to brace it against her shoulder, how to sight down the barrel, how to squeeze the trigger without flinching. Her first shot was wild, kicking up a spray of dirt a dozen feet from the tin can he'd set on a stump. He didn't criticize. He just reset the can. Again, he said. She fired again, and again. Her shoulders ached, and her ears rang, but she didn't stop. A grim determination settled on her face. She was learning to fight back, not against him, but against the fear that had owned her for so long. One evening, as they sat by the fire, the silence was different. It wasn't empty anymore. It was full. She looked at the photograph on the mantel. "She's beautiful," Lena said, her voice soft. Cole stared into the flames. Her name was Sarah. The little one was Lily. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The past was present in the room, a third occupant, somber and respected. "A car accident," he said, the words tasting like ash. "I was driving." It was a confession he'd never spoken aloud. In that moment, he wasn't just a rugged rancher, a hermit. He was a man hollowed out by grief, just as she was a woman hollowed out by fear. They were two broken halves of a whole, sitting by a fire, trying to find a way to keep warm. And maybe you start to realize that healing isn't about becoming who you were before. It's about building something new on the ruins of what you've lost. The world intruded, as it always does. It came in the form of a dusty county sheriff's vehicle, crawling up the long, rutted track to his cabin. Cole saw it from the tree line where he was checking his snares. A cold knot tightened in his gut. It wasn't the law he feared, it was the questions. He got back to the cabin just as the truck door opened. Lena was at the window, her face a mask of stark white terror. She looked like a cornered animal. "Go," he said, his voice low and urgent. "The root cellar." "Don't make a sound." She vanished without a word, the trapdoor closing with a soft thud behind her. Cole stepped out onto the porch, wiping his hands on his jeans, his posture relaxed, casual. A mask of his own. The man who stepped out of the truck was a deputy, young, with a face that hadn't seen enough of the world to be truly hardened. But the man who followed him out of the passenger side was different. He was older, thick-set, with a silver star pinned to a crisp uniform that seemed out of place in the wild country. He had a politician's smile and a predator's eyes. "Sheriff Boyd." "Cole," the sheriff said, his voice a little too friendly. "Been a while." Cole just nodded. Boyd's eyes swept the cabin, the neat woodpile, the curl of smoke from the chimney. His gaze lingered on the window, where Lena had just been standing. "Just making the rounds. Checking on our more isolated residents." The lie was as thin as morning ice. "I'm fine," Cole said. The deputy, Marcus, shifted his feet, looking uncomfortable. He and Cole went back. Not far, but far enough. Marcus knew what had happened to Cole's family. He knew the shape of the man's grief. "Heard anything unusual up here?" Boyd pressed, his smile unwavering. "Strange noises? Anyone passing through?" "Just the wind," Cole said, his voice flat. "And the bears?" Boyd chuckled, a dry, unpleasant sound. "Right. The bears." He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "See, we're looking for someone. A young woman. Fragile. Not in her right mind. Walked away from a care facility. We're worried for her safety." The words were carefully chosen. Fragile. Not in her right mind. They were words designed to strip a person of their agency, their credibility. They were the words of a keeper, not a searcher. Cole's face remained a stone mask. "Haven't seen anyone." Boyd's eyes narrowed, the smile finally vanishing. He stared at Cole for a long, heavy moment, a silent battle of wills playing out on the dusty patch of ground between them. He was assessing. Weighing. "Well," Boyd said, clapping his hands together with false cheer. "If you do, you give us a call. We just want to get her back safe." He turned to leave, but paused, looking back over his shoulder. It's a dangerous world for a confused woman to be out in alone. It wasn't a statement. It was a threat. And it wasn't meant for the woman. It was meant for whoever might be helping her. As the truck disappeared down the track, Marcus glanced back, his eyes meeting Cole's for a fraction of a second. It was a look of warning. A look of apology. Cole stood on the porch until the dust settled, the cold dread in his stomach now a hard, sharp certainty. The trouble hadn't washed up on his shore by accident. It had been driven there. And it had been followed. He let her out of the cellar after the sound of the engine had long faded into the pines. She was trembling, but there was a new light in her eyes. Not just fear. Anger. A cold, hard fire. She knew who Boyd was. She didn't have to say a word. The story was written in the rigid set of her shoulders, the clenching of her fists. He didn't offer false comfort. He didn't say it would be all right. He knew better. Men like Boyd didn't give up. They didn't see people, they saw possessions. Boyd believed she belonged to him. He'll be back, Cole said. It was a simple statement of fact. She nodded, her jaw tight. I know the dynamic between them shifted. They were no longer just two wounded people finding solace in a shared silence. They were allies. A garrison of two against a coming siege. The next few days were taut with unspoken tension. Every snap of a twig, every call of a raven, sent a jolt through the quiet air. They worked together, preparing. He showed her the best places to hide, the game trails that led deep into the forest, away from the road. He cleaned his rifle and his handgun with meticulous care, the scent of gun oil sharp and metallic in the small cabin. She, in turn, stockpiled supplies. She canned the last of the garden vegetables, packed dried meat and hardtack into oilcloth bags. She was no longer a victim waiting to be found. She was a soldier preparing for battle. They spoke little, but their communication was seamless. A look, a nod, a gesture. He would glance at the road, and she would move to check the back door. She would stack firewood by the hearth, and he would ensure the kindling was dry. They were a single unit, their movements choreographed by a shared, imminent threat. It was a strange and terrible intimacy, forged in fear but tempered by a growing, unspoken trust. Have you ever put your faith in someone without knowing why? Just a feeling in your bones that they won't let you fall? That's what was happening in that cabin. She was trusting him with her life, and he, in turn, was letting her into the fortress he had built around his heart. One night, he found her by the window, staring out at the moonlit snow, the rifle resting in the crook of her arm. She wasn't just holding it now, she looked like she belonged with it. He told everyone I was sick, she said, her voice quiet but clear, stripped of its earlier fragility. That my mind was broken. It's easier than telling them he liked to break things. She didn't turn to look at him. She kept her eyes on the darkness outside. He's the sheriff. People believe him, I don't, Cole said. It was all he needed to say. She finally turned, her eyes meeting his in the dim light. A small, sad smile touched her lips for the first time. I know, she said. It was a statement of absolute faith. The quiet before a storm has a weight to it, a heavy stillness where the air itself seems to be holding its breath. This was that quiet. They both knew Boyd would not come alone next time. And he would not be asking questions. The knock on the door came just after dusk, a week later. It wasn't a polite rap. It was a heavy, authoritative slam of a fist against wood. A demand. Cole and Lena had been sitting at the table, a game of checkers half finished between them, a small island of normalcy in a sea of tension. They didn't jump. They had been waiting for this. They simply looked at each other. Every part of their plan, every whispered instruction and silent drill, clicked into place. Cole nodded once. Lena rose, took the rifle, and slipped into the dark bedroom at the back of the cabin, the one with the window that overlooked the rear escape route. Cole walked to the door, his movements unhurried. He didn't open it. Who is it? He called out, his voice steady. Sheriff Boyd, Cole. Open the door. We have a warrant. The wheel was the part that mattered. Cole peered through the small peephole he drilled that week. Boyd was there, flanked by two burly men who were definitely not deputies. They were hired muscle, their faces impassive and cruel. They wore no uniforms. This wasn't official business. This was personal. "Slide it under the door," Cole said. There was a pause. Then Boyd's voice, laced with angry impatience. "Don't be stupid, Cole. We know she's in there. We can do this the easy way or the hard way." This hard way began a second later, with the splintering crack of a boot kicking the door just beside the lock. The old wood groaned but held. Cole didn't bother with words anymore. He moved away from the door, grabbing the heavy, double-bitted axe that leaned near the hearth. It wasn't a firearm, but it was what he had in his hands. The second kick shattered the door jamb, and the door flew open. Boyd stood on the threshold, a smug, triumphant look on his face. "Now, see," he began. That wasn't so, he never finished the sentence. Cole moved, not with the hesitation of a grieving hermit, but with the explosive, brutal efficiency of a man who had seen combat. He swung the axe not at Boyd, but at the lamp on the table beside him. The glass chimney shattered, and kerosene splashed across the floorboards. In the same motion, he kicked the table over, sending the lit base of the lamp tumbling into the pool of fuel. The world erupted in a whoosh of orange flame. The cabin was plunged into a chaotic dance of light and shadow. Boyd and his men recoiled, momentarily blinded. It was all the time he needed. Cole dove to the side, rolling behind the heavy armchair as a gunshot roared, the bullet tearing through the space where he had been standing. Another shot splintered the wood of the chair. He had his handgun now, pulled from the small of his back. He didn't fire blindly. He waited. He listened. One of the thugs was coughing, moving through the smoke. Cole saw a silhouette against the flames. He fired once. A grunt, and the shadow fell. The fire was spreading fast now, eating the dry wood of the cabin, his home, his sanctuary. It didn't matter. It was just a place. Lena was what mattered. "Get out the back," he yelled, his voice raw from the smoke. He heard the back window smash. Good. She was following the plan. Boyd was screaming now, a mixture of rage and fear. "Get him! Find the girl!" The remaining thug was coming around the other side of the chair. Cole fired twice, low, aiming for legs. A cry of pain. Cole used the moment to scramble toward the back of the cabin, keeping low, the smoke a thick, acrid blanket. He glanced back. Through the swirling smoke and fire, he saw Boyd, his face a demonic mask in the firelight, staring not at him, but at the burning photograph on the mantel. The picture of his wife and daughter. In that instant, Cole understood. For Boyd, this was never about Lena. It was about breaking something that belonged to someone else. It was about power. It was about pure, unadulterated cruelty. He made it to the bedroom door, smoke burning his lungs, and stumbled through. He found her outside, crouched behind the woodpile, rifle up and aimed at the front of the cabin. She wasn't running. She was waiting. Waiting for him. When she saw him emerge from the smoke, her face, stark and grimy in the moonlight, flooded with a relief so profound it was almost painful to see. "Go," he gasped, coughing. "Now." To the ridge she shook her head, her grip on the rifle tightening. "Not without you." The fire was a roaring monster now, casting flickering, hellish light across the snow. It was consuming his past, burning away the ghosts. Maybe it was for the best. Suddenly, headlights cut through the darkness, another vehicle tearing up the track. Not Boyd's. This one was familiar. The county SUV. Deputy Marcus. It screeched to a halt, and Marcus spilled out, his service weapon drawn. But he wasn't looking at Cole or Lena. He was looking at the burning cabin, at the figures of Boyd and his one remaining, wounded man staggering out the front, silhouetted against the flames. "Sheriff!" Marcus yelled, his voice carrying a practiced authority Cole had never heard from him before. "Drop your weapon! What's going on here?" Boyd spun around, his face contorted with fury. "Stay out of this, Marcus. This is my business." He raised his own weapon, not at Marcus, but toward the woodpile, toward where he knew Lena must be. It was a fatal mistake. It's a funny thing about loyalty. It's not always to the badge. Sometimes, it's to the man. Marcus had made his choice. A single, sharp crack echoed in the night air. Boyd staggered, a look of profound surprise on his face. He looked down at the red stain blossoming on his crisp uniform, then collapsed into the snow. The last thug, seeing his boss go down, threw his weapon down and raised his hands, his face a mask of terror. Silence fell, broken only by the hungry crackle of the fire. The brief, violent storm was over. Marcus walked forward slowly, his gun still trained on the surrendered man. He didn't look at Cole and Lena. He kept his focus entirely on the official business in front of him. "Saw the fire from the main road," he said, his voice loud enough for any recording device he might be wearing. "Came to investigate. Found the sheriff and unknown assailants firing on a private residence. I was forced to defend myself and the occupants." He finally risked a glance at Cole, his eyes hard but clear. Occupant appeared to be defending his home from an unlawful entry. Cole nodded slowly, understanding the story that was being written. The official story. The one that would smooth over the jagged edges of what had just happened. Lena lowered her rifle, her arms trembling from adrenaline. It was over. The monster was gone. They stood there for a long moment, the three of them, bound by the strange, violent events of the night. Three people on the edge of the law, redrawing the lines of justice in the light of a burning cabin. The aftermath was quiet. Somber. Marcus handled it all with a quiet efficiency that spoke of a man who had seen things go sideways before. The official report would be a masterpiece of omission and careful phrasing. Self-defense. A sheriff gone rogue. A tragic but necessary outcome. He took the hired gun into custody, his face grim. Before he left, he walked over to Cole. "The cabin's a total loss," he said, stating the obvious. "Yeah," Cole said, looking at the glowing embers that had once been his home. "You got a place to go?" Marcus asked. Cole looked at Lena, who stood beside him, her face smudged with soot, her eyes weary but clear. For the first time in years, he wasn't alone in his desolation. "We'll figure it out," Cole said. It wasn't just a statement. It was a promise. He had used a "we." Marcus nodded, a deep understanding passing between them. "I'll be in touch," he said, and then he was gone, leaving them alone with the dying fire and the vast, silent night. They didn't talk. What was there to say? They had faced the beast and won. They had lost a shelter but found something else in the ashes. Standing there, side by side, they watched the last of the roof timbers collapse in a shower of sparks, a funeral pyre for the life Cole had lived in that cabin. It was an ending. But it didn't feel like one. It felt like the cold, clean air after a fever breaks. It felt like the first page of a new book. Do you believe in second chances? Not the easy kind, but the ones you have to fight for, the ones you have to claw out of the wreckage of your own life. That's the kind that matters. That's the kind that sticks. They spent the rest of the night in the barn, huddled in horse blankets, the smell of hay and leather a strange comfort. Boulder, the old horse, watched them with his big, gentle eyes, a silent, steady witness. Neither of them slept. They just watched the eastern sky, waiting for the dawn. And as the first pale, grey light began to silhouette the jagged peaks of the mountains, a fragile new day began. The world was still a harsh and unforgiving place. The past would always be a part of them, a landscape of scars they would carry forever. But it was no longer their prison. It was just their story. A story of a man who ran from a ghost and a woman who ran from a monster, and how they found each other in the storm. They left that morning. They took nothing with them but the horse, the 2 rifles, and the small pack of supplies Lena had prepared. Everything else had been burned away. It was a clean slate. A terrifying, beautiful, clean slate. They walked, Cole leading Boulder, Lena walking beside him. They didn't have a destination. For the first time, that felt less like being lost and more like being free. They walked for hours, the snow crunching under their boots, the silence between them no longer tense or sad, but companionable. It was the silence of two people who had been to hell and back together and had no need for empty words. As they crested a ridge, the sun finally broke free of the mountains, flooding the valley below with golden light. The world looked new, washed clean. Lena stopped. Cole turned to look at her. She was looking out at the vista, a small, genuine smile on her face. Not the sad, haunted smile from the cabin, but a real one. It transformed her. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice soft in the crisp morning air. Cole looked out at the endless expanse of mountains and valleys, at the horizon that promised nothing but also everything. He thought of the ghosts he had carried for so long, the grief that had been his only companion. He realized, with a startling clarity, that their voices were fainter now, their weight less heavy. They hadn't been burned away in the fire. They had been quieted by the presence of the woman standing next to him. "I don't know," he said. And for the first time in a very long time, the words didn't fill him with despair. They filled him with a quiet, trembling hope. He reached out, not thinking, and his hand gently touched her arm. She didn't flinch. She didn't pull away. She just looked at him, her eyes clear and steady, and she smiled. And in that small, simple gesture, a new story began. A story not of running away, but of walking forward. Together. It's important to remember that, isn't it? That even after the longest, darkest storm, the sun does rise. It always does. You just have to be brave enough to wait for the dawn. Thank you for sharing this time with me. If this story meant something to you, you know what to do. Your support helps keep these stories alive. Until next time, be kind to one another, and don't be afraid of the quiet. Sometimes, that's where we find ourselves.